It's a theological world, after all, after all, after all, after all.
Hello and welcome to It's a Theological World After All, where we explore how theology isn't just a Sunday thing, but the opening system beneath everything: science, art, justice, politics, even our morning coffee existential crisis. Today's episode is titled, Why All of the Big Questions Are Really Theological, or at least that's the question we're going to be asking today. And I'm joined by the brilliant philosopher, British philosopher and theologian, Stephen Priest. You might think of theology as just another religion or a religious set of answers, or even maybe a relic of a bygone age. But what if every major philosophical question you've ever asked was already theological in nature? Why is there something rather than nothing? What does it mean to be human? Is there such a thing as truth or love that's not just a chemical trick? These aren't just questions for theologians, they're questions for humans on the ground. And Stephen Priest has made a compelling case that underneath every philosophical inquiry lurks a theological answer. So buckle up, we're about to blur the lines between the sacred and the secular, the philosophical and the deeply personal. I met with Stephen Priest, who's a British philosopher specializing in the intersection of analytic and continental philosophy. He's a senior research fellow at Blackfriars, Oxford, a member of the Faculty of Philosophy at the University of Oxford, as well as holding affiliations with Wolfson College, Hughes Hall, Cambridge. Priest is known for bringing the methods of analytic philosophy to bear on the works of continental thinkers like Hegel, Husserl, Sartre, and Merleau-Ponty, some of the great existentialist philosophers. But he specializes really in deep metaphysical questions, metaphysical inquiry, which is something of an older discipline that has, to some extent, gone out of fashion as of late. But hopefully we can get into the meat and why it is that we need to readdress these questions and bring them back into the fore. So let's jump in. Stephen or Dr. Priest, what should I call you? This is my first time meeting you virtually.
Stephen is fine.
Thank you. It's really good to meet you. Thanks for coming on with me. This is a new series that I'm looking forward to jumping into. And in fact, I just want to say you've had quite an influence on my thinking. Although we haven't met in person, at least we've just now met virtually. I feel like I know you through many of your works, your important works, as well as through many of the people that you have mentored over the years. And so you've had quite an influence and shape on my thinking and continue to shape my thinking. So I appreciate it. And I appreciate your time being with us.
Well, it's my pleasure, Joshua. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for coming on. And I must say, my most recent book, God, Souls, and Consciousness, you had quite an influence on that. And so that's coming out soon. And you actually, I'm very grateful you wrote the afterword for that. And so thank you for that. So today, we're going to jump into this question. It's a theological world after all. That's what the podcast is entitled. And it's based upon an article I wrote for Christianity Today last year, of which you and your thought came up in that article. And so I thought it would be fitting to have a conversation with you about some of these questions surrounding the nature of philosophy, the nature of theology, and how those two relate to one another, and the importance or significance of both of those disciplines, of which you have several answers to those questions. And certainly that has a broader bearing on questions that I'm really interested here in terms of our American context, our evangelical context, and what's actually going on in terms of the theological world around us. What what's going on with all the closings of the institutions around us, the theological institutions, certainly the demise of the humanities themselves. And so this is part of a bigger question of trying to chip away at why theology has, to some extent, according to some, like Roger Olson here in America, has kind of died a little bit and has gone out of fashion and has been perceived by many as, well, irrelevant at one level. And so I think you have a different take on the situation. And so I want to discuss that with you. If we could you, maybe we could jump in, tell us a little bit more about your bio. You have a fascinating history. You're not just a philosopher, an academic, but you have quite a fascinating history educationally as well as vocationally over the years. And that has contributed to making you into the philosopher that you are today.
Yeah, well, if you'd like me to say something about all this, you've raised lots of very interesting questions. The first thing I'd like to say is that in taking the view that philosophical questions have theological answers, I did not have any prior religious motivation. I did not have any previous religious commitment. I was brought up to be an atheist. In fact, my father, as was fashionable in Europe in the 1930s, was a communist, materialist trade union organizer. And so if you imagine somebody being brought up in this atheistic background, I was not motivated in any religious way whatsoever to find that the answers to philosophical questions are theological or in some way religious. I came to this conclusion through trying secular, materialist, humanist, relativist, various forms of addressing philosophical questions and see them all fail, and then trying religious solutions and seeing them massively succeed. So I'm a bit of a test case, if you like. I came from outside the world of religious commitment, but saw that the philosophical questions really only admit of theological answers. But none of this is going to make a great deal of sense, I don't think, unless we get a grip on what philosophy is, and maybe later on what theology is. Now, I think philosophy is this. I think philosophy is a very large number of questions, possibly an infinite number of questions. Now, what makes a question philosophical is that we have no method for addressing it. That's, in my opinion, the only thing that philosophical questions have in common. We have no method for addressing the question. So if you think of questions as not philosophical, in history, we can do some archaeology, or we can look at some documents, or we can consult the library and things like this. We could do some research. Or in science, we can make observations, and we can do mathematical modeling and try to make predictions. In mathematics, we can do some sort of computation and so on. So in every academic subject except philosophy, we've got a rough idea of how to proceed. But in philosophy, we don't know how to proceed. So one thing we're trying to do in philosophy is think up methods of solving problems. Now, it follows in a way from understanding philosophy like this that philosophical problems have no common subject matter. So, for example, some questions in philosophy are about numbers. What are numbers? Do numbers exist? If numbers exist, do they exist outside the mind? Could there be numbers if there was nothing? If there was nothing, could there still in some way be numbers? Maybe the number zero, this sort of thing. Some philosophical questions are about consciousness. What's the relationship between consciousness and the brain? Your brain, although inordinately complex, is billions of atoms moving in empty space. So what is the relationship between your everyday awareness and billions of atoms moving in empty space? Quite frankly, we have no idea, or next to no idea. It's characteristic of philosophy that you come up against limits of science. Now, in order to see the plausibility of philosophical questions having theological answers, I'd have to take some examples of philosophical questions where, after a while, hopefully, the theological outcome or solution is quite clear. By a theological answer, I mean an answer that logically entails the existence of God, or the immortality of the soul, or the freedom of the will. I think the freedom of the will and the immortality of the soul are going to entail the existence of God. So these questions are bunched together in a way that's logically interesting, or these solutions are bunched together. But I'll start with just one question, which I think is a very profound question. I think at the moment, we don't actually have the foggiest idea why somebody is you. We don't have the faintest idea why somebody is you. Now, it might seem odd to our viewers or listeners that I think that this is a difficult problem, because after all, don't we know in a completely obvious way that your parents had sexual intercourse, or in some way fused the egg and the sperm? Don't we know that a human being has a complicated genetic makeup which dictates the shape of the nose and other things? Surely we know that you are precisely this human being who was born in this place in the US or England or wherever we are, was socialized and educated in these institutions, at these friends. Now, I think all that information is there. That's fine. There's a huge number of facts along these lines: neurological, sociological, genetic, and so on. But all these facts only go to show why this human being is the way it is. It does. None of these facts begins to explain why this human being is you. Let me say why that is. If you consider the human being who you are, there's a massive difference or asymmetry between this human being who you are and all the other human beings. All the other human beings are, so to speak, over there, or viewed from the outside. You can see their faces. You can walk around them. You could look at the back of their heads. You could tour them. You could point to them. They're in China, or they're in the UK, or they're in Europe, or they're in other parts of the US. They're over there. But the human being you are is not like that at all. You view the world from this human being. You're centered on this human being. You've never seen the back of your own head. You can't see your own face, maybe the tip of your nose a bit. It doesn't help to say that you could look in the mirror. The point, we're not doing epistemology here. You don't have to look in the mirror to see anybody else. In other words, there's such a thing as you being one of these human beings, if it is in the end correct that being it is the relationship you have to the human being. That might not be right, but this is the way we kind of commonsensically think. You think you're Joshua Farris. I think I'm Stephen Priest. Now, we've got no idea why you are centered on one of these human beings. We haven't got the foggiest idea. In particular, it's scientifically inexplicable why you are one of these humans, or why you view the world from one of these human beings, or why you operate one of these human beings, or why you're present at one of these human beings, or present through one of these humans. Indeed, this particular one. In fact, Tom Nagel in NYU has seen this problem very, very, very clearly and wrote it up in his 1986 book, The View from Nowhere. I mean, Tom is not a religious person, but he perceives the problem with great clarity. And if you look at page 52 or thereabouts in Tom Nagel's book, there's a little section called Being Someone. And Tom can't answer the question, but that's because he doesn't want to do theology. He doesn't want to do theology because theology is in a way a disreputable mode of explaining. But I think we should go wherever the explanation takes us and not worry too much about that. I mean, I think Tom is probably more open to religious explanations than my dad was, right? Somebody like that. But he won't bite the bullet. Now, the thing is that something. Well, this human being, who you are or who you take yourself to be, could have existed without you existing. This human being that you take yourself to be could have existed without you existing. There's no incoherence or contradiction entailed by this supposition, or there are possible worlds, if you like, in which this human being, Joshua Farris, exists, but you are not Joshua Farris. Joshua Farris is not you. It's either somebody else or possibly, less plausibly, nobody at all. Now, right. You might say, well, what would the world be like? Well, it's just that Joshua Farris would be just another member of the public, just another member of the public. The world wouldn't be twisted inside out for you at the Joshua Farris point, or perhaps inside out is not right. Perhaps outside in is the right way of thinking it, because you view the world out there from inside the Joshua Farris, or presence at the Joshua Farris. Now, I love academic philosophy, and I've spent 45 years or something teaching academic philosophy in the UK and in other countries, including the US, including, say, Dartmouth, Colorado, and so on, Rhode Island. Yeah. But the thing is, in academic philosophy today, we underestimate the profundity of the philosophical questions. Philosophy in Anglo-American universities is conducted in an admirably logical and precise manner. Philosophy is an academically sophisticated and high-powered subject, and that's wonderful, that's excellent. But something that we tend to miss is the gravity, the seriousness, the profundity of the philosophical questions. Now, the question I've just tried to explain to you is a profound question. We don't know why something is you. We don't know why something is you. And like a lot of philosophical questions, we so utterly take the reality for granted that we don't notice it. We don't notice how utterly puzzling and astonishing it is that something is you. Now, if you have followed what I said, if you agree there's a very profound and difficult problem here, it's obvious that there's no hope of any sort of scientific, including neurological explanation for something being you in this sense. And unless we start to talk about God and the soul, we're not going to come near to answering this question. We need, for example, if there are possible worlds in which this human being exists but you do not exist, then it follows that you're not identical with any of the mental or the physical properties of this human being. You're not exactly the same thing as any or all of its mental states, and you're not exactly the same thing as any or all of its physical states, all those mental and physical states put together, what I call the psychophysical constellation, which does exist. You somehow pervade or inhabit or are now present through this psychophysical constellation, or you operate it. All right. Now, now it follows from this that you're not any sort of physical being, and you're not in any straightforward sense a mental being. You're not straightforwardly some sort of psychological item, as Hume tried to find but failed, right? Rather, you are whatever it is that has your experiences. You are the witnessing self. You are that which is and perceived, but is not perceived. Bishop Berkeley, in his writings, talks about the existence of the soul consisting in perceiving but not being perceived, rather in contrast with physical objects, which are their being consists in being perceived, but not in perceiving. He's right about all that, I think. He's extremely perceptive in those respects. He's an Anglican bishop who wrote in the 18th century.
Yes.
Okay. Now, there's an awful lot more that could be said about this. For example, the problem of personal identity is a profound question which is raised in contemporary philosophy. And if you read the literature on it, really, all the psychophysical putative solutions don't solve the problem. You're only going to solve the problem of personal identity if you recognize the existence of something about you, which is completely changeless, something which has not changed despite all the mental and physical differences between you and a baby, or you when you're my age, or something like that. There's something utterly unchanging about you. Now, if there's something utterly unchanging about you, it means there's something utterly timeless about you. And whatever it is, it has to be what your existence consists in, what it consists in for you to exist over time, as opposed to there to just be what I call the psychophysical constellation, or this set of psychophysical processes over time. Now, and it's also what you are, whatever your personal identity consists in the being of whatever it is that you are. I mean, part of the problem is that you're so subjective, you can't be perceived by yourself. The dog might just about manage to bite its own tail, but you, the perceiver, are not going to perceive the perceiver. Now, once we start to stack in all these facts, we're arriving at the view that there's an immaterial self that your existence essentially consists in, and it's not identical with the body, and it's not identical with the set of your mental states. And this is pretty much what St. Augustine and Descartes and Plato mean by the soul. So
Yes.
So really, understanding that you are a soul isn't some sort of crazy, extravagant view. It's based on understanding the profundity of a group of philosophical questions about your own existence. Now, I've said a lot about your own existence. We don't have much time. We should probably move on to more questions.
Right. So let me step back and ask some questions about what you've just said, specifically for the audience as well, so that they understand and we can unpack. There's a lot that you said that's rich. So going back to philosophy, I want to explore this a little bit. Can you tell us, what do you mean by philosophy? Once again, you're utilizing this idea, or this thought about the self as a lens by which we can get at this deeper set of issues that are latent within these bigger questions that we all ask, and even the more fundamental questions about that we ask within philosophy, namely, what is the purpose of life, and these sorts of questions. What is the meaning, and all of that. And so that helps you arrive at some sort of transcendent answer about ultimate reality that you're taking to be theological. So I want to get there, and then get to this notion of the unconditioned soul. You wrote this article back in 2012. It was an important article for me, and I certainly want to unpack some of those ideas as we look at the nature of philosophy as it's being done today. But let's step back even further and say, what is philosophy at all? What is philosophy at the end of the day? And you
Yeah, well, I
said
think
this, but I want to say it again.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think philosophy is the attempt to answer philosophical questions. As I say, in philosophy, we try to devise techniques of problem solving for problems where otherwise we've got no real means of addressing the questions. I mean, there are questions which historically have been philosophical that don't look philosophical now, which is not to say they've been answered. But I mean, in the late 17th century, it's a philosophical question whether any knowledge is innate, i.e., you're born with it, or whether all knowledge is learned. Well, for example, Locke and Leibniz, at some distance from one another or through intermediaries, disagree on this question. Locke thinks just about everything is learned, and Leibniz thinks that innate. There are certain fundamental concepts which are innate, which we're born with. Well, later on, with the discovery of the gene, and with the invention of genetics, and with the development of different kinds of psychology, social psychology, and so on, excuse me, these questions can be addressed empirically. This is an example of people thinking up methods of addressing problems which are previously philosophical. But it's the really profound questions of philosophy that need theology to answer them, but the profundity is easily missed. I mean, if I could give you another example of a philosophical question, we don't really know why the time is now, or what it consists in for the time to be now. And there are lots of different theories of time in philosophy, in phenomenology, and in analytical philosophy, and in the writings of Henri Bergson, who's in a way neither phenomenological nor analytical. And I mean, some people think that that there's no such time as the now, or the now is only the becoming past of the future. So it's instantaneous. In a sense, it might be a time, but if it is a time, it's a time that doesn't take any time to be. In other words, it's instantaneous, or it's only a transition. It's not it's not a duration or a time interval. The now on that view. On other views, that's wrong. And actually, there's no such thing as the future, because the future hasn't happened yet. And by the time it does happen, it's now. Or there's no such thing as the past, because the past, by definition, is over. And so it's gone. In that sense, it doesn't exist. Now, I think that it's an insight, in a way, to notice that despite all these views of time, in a sense, it's only ever now. Or in a sense, the time is always now. If we help ourselves to this notion of always, it's never not now. Now, this might seem odd to people who think that the now is disappearing all the time, but I think the disappearing is the thing that's disappearing is what happens in the now. The events which take place now are effervescent, or they're no sooner here than gone. Or depending on what we mean by an event, it might hang around.
As soon as they're here, they're gone.
Yeah. But the now in which it's all happening is utterly unchanging, on my view, or utterly timeless. Now, I'm inclined to say that, as so often in philosophy, you can either see this or you can't, or we're conditioned into different ways of thinking. And so it might require a wrench of perception and thought to notice that it's only ever now. I mean, if you walked out into the street in Oxford or in Houston or wherever we were, and somebody asked, what's the time? Do you know what time it is? And you said now, you might annoy the person, or they might think it was a cheeky, an impertinent answer, but it would actually be right. And it would be right whenever the conversation took place. And that's because the time is only ever now. So, if I said it's 10:35, is that not right? Yeah,
it's 10:35 on my time, at least. 10:35 a.m. in
Yeah.
Central Time in America.
Yeah, I mean the 10:35 bit might be right or wrong depending on where we are in the US or in the UK and so on. But the what I'm trying to zero in on here is it is 10:35. You know, what is it to be the time that it is? What is this being the time it is? It's a bit like the question. Is it Wednesday or is it Tuesday today? Well, I don't know. I think it's Thursday, actually, at least in the UK it is. Probably in the US
Yes.
too. Yeah, okay, right.
Yes.
But we can ask the more profound question: what does it consist in for a day to be today? What does it consist in for a day to be today? And you know, philosophical questions, although profound, you've got to come through a certain amount of thought to understand the question. I mean, if I ask a colleague in Oxford, what is it for a day to be today? I mean, a colleague might, as a more scientifically minded colleague, might say, "Oh well, you know, the Earth it rotates, okay, and it's in orbit around the sun, and you know the sun kind of shines on one side." Well, I know all that. I know all that. I know all that. All that's
Right.
the answer to a different question. That answers the question: what is it for something to be a day, or why are there days on planet Earth? What I want to know is what it consists in for a day to be today, for a day to be the day it is. Well, a day is the day it is if it's now, or it's the present, or it's actuality. Now, if you look at the now as something timeless, when everything happens, you'll notice that the now, as opposed to a particular time, doesn't have boundaries. The now is, if you like, a kind of presence or pure presence when everything happens. And arguably, if something goes out of the now, then it excuse me. Then it's destroyed, it's annihilated. And if something comes into the now, it begins to be, it exists. I mean, if you ask, you know, why doesn't George Washington exist, or why isn't he alive? It's because he doesn't exist now. It's because he's not alive now. He did exist, of course. It's a historical figure. But to say that something exists is to say that it exists now. You can say that's a logical or semantic implication of the present tense of the word exists, but on a more profound level, it's actually right that if something exists, it exists now, it exists in the now. Now, the more you notice that it's only ever now, and that time in the ordinary sense is coming and going in and out of the now, or through the now into nothingness at both ends, or out of nothingness and into nothingness. The now has infinite properties, or the now is unbounded, and the now is necessary for everything that happens within it. And of course, the now is not physical events and physical objects come into existence and go out of existence within the now. Now, the more you understand the now in this timeless way, the more theological it looks.
Okay. Yeah. What does that mean? Yeah.
Well, what it means is that to thoroughly understand the now, we would have to understand the now as the presence of God. We'd have to understand the now as the presence of God, the unchanging now as the presence of as the unpresence of God, something that can't be explained scientifically, something that's necessary for everything that happens to happen. But this would be to understand the now as with a profundity that's pretty opaque to modernity. There might be a few mystics here and there, or people who've thought about this or noticed this, but by and large, it's missed by people trying to solve problems in academic philosophy, where now is only treated as an indexical term, a kind of self-referential term.
I see. Yes,
understood in terms of the speaker, but there's an ontology to now. The now is immense.
Yes.
The timeless now is
yes.
unbounded in its immensity. So on this view, where the now is the presence of God, God is very close to us, or we are inescapably in the presence of God. And if we were to go out of the presence of God instantaneously, we would be instantaneously vaporized, or less than vaporized. We'd cease to exist utterly. So it's rather as St. Augustine says, when you die, you find out that God was holding you all along. Well, it's possible within life to come to an understanding that God is holding us all along, or that we are within. Being within the now is to be within the presence of God. I mean, that's quite a lot about now. It's probably quite a lot to take in, but you could have a similar discussion about being. There's a very good philosophical question. What does it consist in to be? What does it consist in to exist? And Parmenides, who, depending on what you think a philosopher is arguably the earliest Western philosopher. Parmenides has an interesting discussion of pure being, or being as being, and it is a very profound discussion. It's written in the form of a poem, the ancient Greek philosopher Parmenides. But modern discussions tend to be distracted by two things. One is plurality. We're looking at existence in terms of the existence of this thing rather than that thing, or these things rather than those things. And we wonder whether being or not being are properties of objects that exist and don't exist. Whereas the whole notion of plurality is something of a distraction in understanding the nature of being. And the other mode of distraction is becoming. Whether it's in Heraclitus or in Nietzsche, although they're interesting thinkers, it's going up the garden path, or the Holzweg, if you like, because to understand being, you have to understand being qua being, or being as being rather than not being. And that doesn't have very much at all to do with being something. Being rather than not being is not the same thing as being something, or becoming. Becoming is gaining and shedding properties. So the notion of becoming is parasitic on the notion of being something or not being that thing. But being is far more profound than beings or becoming. I mean, to see this, just ask the question: for any becoming, is there becoming or is there no becoming? Well, if there's becoming, then becoming presupposes being, and if there's no becoming, well, the Nietzsche and the Heraclitus just doesn't arise anyway. So being is fundamental. Unless there's being, there's not anything. Now, I think pure being, in this more or less Parmenidean and possibly Heideggerian sense, is theological. On closer inspection, it turns out to have theological properties, because unless there's being, there's nothing. So I think if you're a religious person, being had better be the being of God. God had better not be some sort of superhero or super being, just
not Superman.
Primus inter pares, who just is more powerful than other beings. Being itself had better be the being of God. Otherwise, in God, you've not reached rock bottom, right? You've not actually come to the necessary condition for everything, with no necessary condition except itself. But if we talk about pure being, that is what we're talking about. So the being of God is pure being, even though God has divine properties. But the more you investigate pure being in this quasi-Parmenidean sense, the more you realize, as Parmenides is pre-Christian, but he realizes that being is infinite, that being is necessary for beings, that being is not physical. You might think, well, why can't being be physical? Well, it's because being is not being this, that, or the other. Being rather than not being is not the same thing as being mental or physical or political or mathematical or anything else.
Or any other thing,
being rather than not being. The other interesting thing about being, which makes being the being of God, is that being is necessary. There is necessarily being. You can see that being is necessary if you distinguish between being and nothing, or being and nothingness, and you say that. Supposing somebody says, "Oh, there might have been nothing. There could have been nothing. There could have been nothing." Well, to my mind, the claim "there is nothing" is incoherent, because it means there exists nothing, and that's an incoherent notion. It's in the nature of nothing not to exist, right? So you can't coherently say there is nothing. I mean, you can go and say, "Oh, there's nothing in the room. I thought there were some books in the room, but there's nothing in it." That's all right. This is thinking at an empirical level, but at a more profound level, there is nothing is incoherent. I mean, it can mean it's not the case that there's anything. That's all right. God might not have created, all right, or there might have been no things, but it's not possible that there should be pure nothing. So
there
being pure nothing is an incoherent notion. It belongs to the notion of nothing not to be. It belongs to the nature. It's essential to nothing. Not to be. Parmenides sees it interestingly. Ayer and Carnap and the Vienna Circle accuse Heidegger of trying to make nothing or nix into a kind of peculiar existence, whereas Heidegger is obviously at pains to try to do the opposite.
So if I were to step in here,
has the properties
go ahead.
Being has the properties of the being of God. So you see. What is it to be? Well, it's either to be God or to depend on God. It's very
and God itself is not an entity that is contained in some way.
No, not
so
at all.
Then
God would be a being. Then God would be a being. But the being of God is pure being. Itself. Beings belong to creation. I mean, a very interesting question is, supposing there is pure being in this Parmenidean or possibly Heideggerian sense, why are there any beings? Now, it's a necessary truth that there's being. There couldn't not have been being, because either there's nothing or there's being. There's no nothing. Therefore, there's necessarily being. That's all right. But why are there any beings? Why are there any beings? It's a contingent fact that there are beings. There is all that. There are all these things in Houston and Oxford and so on, books and microphones and goodness knows what, all right? But there might not have been any of this. All these things exist contingently. Now, I think, philosophically speaking, at a profound level, the only possible explanation is that beings, somehow beings, all of them are a product of being, right? Somehow beings. Now, we might, although profound, that's rather an abstract thought. And in theological terms, we can rewrite it as God creates. God creates.
Yes.
And the contingency of beings, there might not have been any beings, is the theological doctrine that God creates optionally, or God creates freely. God creates freely, because a contingent fact, although a fact, is a fact that might not have obtained. Now,
philosophy. Can I ask you? Let me try to restate what you've been stating. So we've asked the important question. These are kind of the fundamental questions that define philosophy, or exemplify the importance of philosophy, or exemplify what it is that philosophy is, which is actually hard to define at one level. Why is time now? What is being? And what does it mean to be you, or the kind of the I, me, you problem, right? The I, me, you problem seems to exemplify something deeper about the nature of philosophy itself, that points to something that is unexamined, that is at one level, at any point, at one level, anytime you begin to name it, the naming of it itself doesn't quite do justice to what it is and to what the problem is that is being generated by philosophy itself. Is that right? Something like that?
Well, those are very, very interesting thoughts. I think most of us, most of the time, are too busy to reflect deeply on these issues. We're in too much of a rush.
Yes.
I'd also say that there are habits of thinking, perhaps especially in the West, in Britain and the US and Europe, but maybe more widely as well, which are inimical to perceiving the profundity of philosophical problems. I mean, one is thinking in terms of generalities. Even in philosophy and psychology, we talk about the mind or persons or consciousness or human beings and so on. But talking in generalities is an obstacle or a distraction from noticing the mystery, the one-offness of something's being you. Or another habit of thought is we're always on the way in our minds. Maybe human beings are generally like this, but especially in Western liberal capitalist society, we're on the way to the next ice cream, the next cup of coffee, the next meeting, the next job promotion, whatever it is that we're either compelled to be engaged in or we're
some sort of project, right? Some sort of practical project.
Always on the way. Now that the mind, the whole human being always being on the way or unterwegs is inimical to perceiving that it's always now. You don't notice that it's always now because you're fixated on the future. But actually what you're doing in your life is running on the spot. This is not to say you don't achieve things. Of course you do. It's very nice that you achieve more money in a car and a nice place and all that. Of course you do. But all that is still running on the spot because it's still now and you're still you and you're still within being. The being and the now are the same thing in a way or mutually dependent. Being is the being of presence and presence is the presence of being. So the pure now, which it always is with the world going on within it, the pure now is the now or the presence of being. And the pure being that everything participates in, that gives beings is the being of presence. So they're mutually dependent. I mean, there are lots of other problems that we could talk about. You rightly say these are profound problems. I mean, there are thousands of philosophical problems. Some of them are profound, some of them less profound. It depends partly where your interests lie, but I feel these are utterly profound because they push us inevitably into theology. But the third area we could possibly talk about a bit is consciousness, because science has got no explanation of consciousness. We've got no idea why consciousness exists. We don't really have much idea what consciousness is. And yet, at least from morning till night every day, you are your own consciousness, or you're present as this consciousness, or your presence through this human being involves your being conscious or your being aware. Well, my
consciousness isn't just a function, right? Or is it a mechanism?
It's not any kind of mechanism. I mean, mechanism is to do with physical components changing their spatio-temporal location. I mean, to say that consciousness is a kind of mechanism is you might as well say that consciousness is a brick or something. It's just a complete misunderstanding. But one thing in
America, can I step back?
Yeah.
And because this is really interesting. I mean, so philosophy generates these questions and it asks the most profound questions of human meaning. And I think that in and of itself is worth stepping back and thinking over and realizing that in the generation of disciplines itself, if I'm hearing you correctly, all disciplinary divisions, separations, which are presupposing some sort of methodological assumptions and principles at work, are really at one level the constructs that are generated by philosophy itself.
I think they emerged out of philosophy. I think that's right. I mean, I think the ancient Greeks, 2,500 years ago, their aim was to explain everything, to answer every question, and for this reason.
Yeah.
They start to do mathematics, they start to do biology, they invent different ways of dividing up plants and animals and things like that. And so, some of the questions still look philosophical to us now. Some of them look more scientific or sociological or historical. But I think the divisions that we have academically in the US and the UK between faculties and so on are due to the ancient Greeks doing philosophy, thinking up techniques of problem solving, and then the techniques get hived off as scientists. Could I just go back to consciousness just for a moment, though, because I wrote a paper for the journal called Religions or Religion, is it called? I can't remember. You kindly you were involved in it.
Yeah, the special issue. Yes.
Yeah. About quantum physics and the existence of God. And, in quantum physics, there are many, many different interpretations of quantum physics, maybe 24 or 30, depending on how you distinguish one interpretation from another. But I think any interpretation of quantum physics that's got any plausibility presupposes the reality of consciousness. Of course, I don't just mean as a theory. I mean the world as described through quantum physics on this theory. That world presupposes the reality of consciousness, and not just in the experimental observational situation, but kind of globally. Now, if that's right, then if the physical world depends on quantum reality, which it does, and quantum reality depends upon consciousness, then the physical world depends on consciousness. The logic is inevitable, but the kind of consciousness
so some sort of idealism,
the kind of consciousness that the physical world depends on can only be God, or can only be of inordinate power, and in a way all pervading, at least as pervasive as the physical universe. So this is another reason for thinking that philosophical questions have theological answers. The fact that quantum physics, the reality of it, presupposes consciousness globally, not just locally in the observation.
Yes.
Now, if I could just bring these three of these things together. I've said something about being, and something about now, and something about consciousness. Now, I think these philosophical profundities are best understood in terms of the Holy Trinity. I think that the being is the I am of Exodus, the Father. I think the eternal now, or the unchanging now, is Christ, who has existed from all eternity, or is not Christ, but Christ, the second person of the Trinity, is timeless. The Logos, and the consciousness, which is presupposed by anything physical, is the Holy Spirit. So we can use the Christian theological doctrine, the doctrine of the Holy Trinity, to give greater clarity, depth, and understanding to these philosophical answers, which I came to as beginning as an atheist, or beginning as a skeptic. I mean, like lots of people, I was socialized into atheism and taught to be suspicious of religious institutions, and I was taught that religions cause wars, for example. It seems to me extremely unlikely. It seems to me that it's quite hard to count the wars that have not happened because of religion, but there must be a lot of people who are held back ethically from killing by a sincere religious commitment. So I was taught it would be a bad thing to be religious.
So you've been socialized. So you're saying atheism itself is a socialization that's a kind of product of a certain constraints, certain conditions, certain framework that were originally generated by the philosophical questions themselves. So, but philosophical questions left without the answers. Is atheism sort of a philosophical without any answer? Is it sort of a philosophical how would you put this metaphor? I don't know, a sort of philosophical swimming in the cave without ever finding any answers.
That's very good. I think that's excellent. I think that is what atheism is. That's the situation. Same really with agnosticism. Yeah.
So when they say, well, there's just nothing, there's something even philosophically profound about them. The fact that they could even utter that statement is strange. Strange, and there's something else going on there. Is atheism even at one level? Is atheism even possible? So philosophy generates these questions. So I think this is really helpful for the listeners. Philosophy is the one that generates the questions. It generates these sorts of disciplinary methods. It generates the methodological constraints themselves, so that we can get on in the world, and we can do stuff, and we can like, in the empirical realm, we can get stuff done. We can bring about things, and we can philosophy is really the kind of the generator of propping up these sorts of impressive things that we've been able to accomplish in the world. Even in terms of like architecture itself is somehow rooted in philosophy already. It is a kind of even as you said, biology itself is a discipline that we see going back to Aristotle's work and physics and the like, and where he's already giving us categories. The categories themselves are philosophical. Sure. They're generated by philosophy, right?
Yeah, true.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different directions to go here. This is so important. I'm thinking about Descartes. Descartes, in his meditations, he's often interpreted as providing a method, and what a methodological way to do philosophy. But is Descartes basically doing what scientists are doing, or what Hume is doing at one level?
That's very interesting that you raised that question. I suppose what's happened since Descartes is that modernity has dumped or dropped 50% of Descartes, the part that's about God, the soul, consciousness, your own existence, and modernity has endorsed the other 50% of Descartes, which is the physical universe and its study through empirical science, and especially informed by mathematics. So what we've done is left half of Descartes behind in modernity. Maybe it's time to restore him. I mean, Descartes is a bit of a villain in modern philosophy, in different movements in modern philosophy. And what you have to do is try to refute Descartes, but it's not quite clear why you have to try and refute Descartes.
He's the whipping boy.
He is the whipping boy. So maybe if we're not solving the philosophical problems, we should take Descartes seriously. Maybe the whipping boy shouldn't be the whipping boy. I mean, you said some very interesting things. I mean, about atheism, agnosticism, and modernity. I think a lot of thought in modernity is now in the service of technology, in the service of the Industrial Revolution, and then building motor cars and airplanes and space rockets, and now in the service of AI. And this technological pull on thinking is absolutely enormous. Heidegger notices this, or writes a bit about this in the little booklet on Technic, on question on technology, or question concerning technology. But I must say, philosophy hasn't necessarily been fighting in the opposite direction. I mean, I think that since Kant wrote the Critique of Pure Reason towards the end of the 18th century, we've been operating within an essentially Kantian paradigm, which is very pessimistic about doing metaphysics, which underestimates the profundity and the genuine nature of philosophical questions. And so I think all the movements in philosophy since Kant, including phenomenology, dialectic, existentialism, analytical philosophy, logical positivism, these are an explosion of the critique of pure reason, or an expansion or extrapolating from the critique of pure reason. But they all tend to be anti-metaphysical philosophies. There are not many philosophers since Kant who escape the Kantian paradigm. I suppose somebody who argues overtly for the existence of God, like Alvin Plantinga here, or my colleague Richard Swinburne in Oxford, these people are doing something that's essentially non-Kantian or anti-Kantian, or escaping the Kantian paradigm. Heidegger nearly escapes the Kantian paradigm in Being and Time, the 1927 book, but he doesn't manage to finish the book because he's afraid to do metaphysics. He's afraid to do theology because he finds Kant massively in the way. It's no accident that the next book that Heidegger brings out is the Kant book, Kant and the Problem of Metaphysics. It comes out very soon afterwards, 29, I think, 2 years later, because Kant is the obstacle to doing metaphysics. I mean, you can use Kant to do metaphysics, but you have to go out of your way to do that. In the hands of modernity, Kant is used as a way of preventing people from doing metaphysics, unfortunately. So a lot of modern philosophy, although very technically excellent, I would call not philosophy but anti-philosophy. It's an absurd fact about the subject that people spend an awful lot of time telling us why we can't solve the problems instead of trying to solve the problems, saying that we're, for example, cognitively constituted so that we can pose the questions but not answer them. Well, why not alter your cognition? Why not do some yoga or have an AI implant or something? Why not expand your cognitive horizons if you feel you need it? If you can't do it, you can't do it from your own natural resources. I suppose there are other tendencies which are not Kantian. Frege thinks that arithmetic is analytic, and the utilitarians and their ethics are anti-Kantian, non-Kantian. But those things don't bear very closely on theology.
So so from your interpretation of the history of modern philosophy in particular, that's really at one level philosophically is generated where we are today, and at least the way that it's been taken contingently, the way that the questions have been constrained, has produced kind of where we are today in terms for good and bad, in terms of our academic situation. Going back to Descartes, there's a sense in which, from your interpretation, like Descartes was doing, at one level, he was doing what others that followed after him in modernity picked up on, and he was doing that. But he was also doing theology, really, at one level. Yeah, I mean, so he wasn't just looking at the body, say in the meditations, and seeing the body as a kind of technical problem. That wasn't ultimately the point. That wasn't the point of his meditations on the body. That the body is, as it were, the boundaries that it has, spatial extension. Rea extensa. That wasn't that wasn't necessarily the point of his meditations, in terms of eliciting what it is that ultimately matters or points us to reality itself. To fixate on that would be to distract. Is that right?
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, I think I agree with that. I mean, what at the beginning of the meditations, what Descartes says the meditations is about trying to find certainty. He's trying to find some fact which is so indubitable, so definitely certain, that all knowledge can be based on this or premised on that. That's a very interesting project. It's what Bernard Williams calls the project of pure inquiry. But so allegedly it's a purely epistemological project, but he does a lot of very interesting metaphysics along the way. I mean, he thinks he can't doubt his own existence. He thinks he's got a proof of the immortality of the soul. He arrives at the conclusion that the existence of God is more certain than than empirical certainties, and I'm inclined to agree with a lot of these claims that Descartes makes. I think if you understand pure being as the being of God, and if you understand the timeless now, the unchanging now, as the presence of God, then it's impossible to doubt the existence of God. It's completely impossible to doubt the existence of God, and that the atheism that you're talking about is just a very naive misunderstanding. I mean, one problem with modernity is that the atheism, agnosticism, and a lot of the TV and schools and the newspapers and so on deal with very crude parodies of religion, where to be religious is to hold crazy, groundless beliefs because you want them to be true, as though belief is some believing religious truth is some extravagant postulate or extra reality tacked on, maybe something hidden the other side of the sky or something like that. Whereas I think actually the existence of God and the presence of God and consciousness are, if you like, profundities. And if you've got the eyes to see, you can begin to discern the permanent through the transient. Or it's possible to notice that the timeless or the permanent or the utterly unchanging or the abiding is there, irrespective of the coming of going of mental and physical events. So I don't think of religion as some extravagant set of groundless beliefs. I think of profound religious truths as making possible the ordinary scientific and day-to-day facts that we rely on. So on these ways of thinking, I'm trying to put over really the distinction between empiricism and metaphysics, or science and existentialism. These ways of approaching tend to come together. I mean, if I say it's always now, in a way that seems to me the most empirically confirmed of claims, more empirically confirmed than claims in relativity theory or in the theory of evolution or these things that go on in science. It seems utterly confirmed that the time is now, or that there's being rather than nothingness, or that being is not a being, not in any straightforward sense. I mean, in some necessary sense, of course, being is a being. Being, as Parmenides sees, is essentially and necessarily one, not a plurality. Even if there's a plurality of beings as well as being, they're all in being, and their being in being rather than not in being is their being one, or it's a monolithic fact.
Yeah. Ironically, so if that's the most obvious empirical fact that the present is or the now is now, and that's what we can say most assuredly is empirically confirmed. Ironically, that certainly does rule out materialism, naturalism. It seems to off the bat, right? Because you can't.
Those are very superficial philosophies. I mean, materialism. The strong materialism, everything is physical in every respect, and weak materialism, unless there are physical things, there are not things, or everything has to have at least some physical property, or there have to be things with some physical properties in order for there to be any things at all. You can identify different kinds of materialism, and it's just lacking in profundity. that someone who thinks materialism is right is not thinking at the level of being and presence. And they
That's
almost
right. Yes.
and they
Yes.
almost certainly have not noticed their own existence. Materialism works quite, if it works at all, it works for the other, or it's not a bad stab at what a human being is viewed from the outside. As long as you leave yourself out of the picture, I mean, you looking at Stephen Priest over here could just about believe that he's a sort of fleshy, physical thing and nothing else. It requires a wrench of the imagination to believe that, I think. But it's in your own case that you're directly acquainted with the reputation of materialism and your own thoughts and emotions, hopes, fears, regrets, the interiority of your own consciousness, what I would call the absolute interiority of your own consciousness, the inside without an outside, which is your own pure presence, that which the Buddhists describe as emptiness, but is in fact the interiority of your own soul, the unbounded spiritual space in which you live your life.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So materialism is basically the a philosophy of forgetting the self, which empties it of any sort of meaningful way of. So looking at the present now, I mean, is it possible to? In one sense, we can empirically confirm it's the most empirically confirmable or verifiable thing in terms of our, if we're able to recognize it. If we're able to recognize it, it's the most empirically confirmable thing. From a materialist point of view, though, can we actually confirm it from a third person or from another point of view? I mean, can the now being now? Can that be confirmed materially?
No, I don't think so. Or, well, it's not a material fact. So depends what we mean by confirming materially. If something physical exists, then that physical thing exists now. So that's a kind of material confirmation of the time being now, or it being now whenever something exists. It's an example. It's an example, if you like. But the time always being now or never not being now is not any kind of material or physical fact. As I say, I think it's a fact about God. I hold this view because the now is unbounded or infinite, and the now is when everything happens. It's not possible for something to happen unless the time is now when it does happen. So the now understood in this way is pure presence. It's not the presence of anything physical or anything in particular, or anything mental. It just is pure presence. It's quite interesting that we use presence in English in the sense of now, present, but also in the sense of I am in your presence or you're in my presence. Michael Linwood thought it was a quasi-spatial sense. I'm not sure it includes a spatial sense or it admits of a spatial sense, but you could be in the presence of something immaterial as well as the presence of something material. Well, I think perhaps these two notions of presence are mutually dependent. So the now, the timeless now, is the now. It is the time it is, whatever time it is, but it's also a kind of infinite presence. And I understand that as the presence of God, because it's immaterial, it's necessary for everything that happens. It sustains present things in the way that pure being sustains the beings that there are. So, we could say that the nows or actuality is the actualization of the things that are, rather as beings, or to put it in theological terms, God creates. I mean, you see, if I'm right about these answers to philosophical questions, it would be very odd if God and the soul and freedom of the will and so on existed extra or in addition to the things that I'm talking about. Right. But once you reach being and presence, you reach rock bottom. if you think there's something more fundamental than being, you haven't understood what being is. There is no nothing. Becoming depends on being. Beings depend on being. Once you reach being, you reach rock bottom. So if you're religious, being had better be the being of God. Otherwise, God isn't rock bottom, and God clearly is rock bottom. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, right? I think so. Yes.
Yeah. So I think there's a job to be done, which is to interpret and reinterpret, excuse me, these philosophical truths as theological truths. And I think the Christian doctrine of the Holy Trinity is the most profound and truthful way, most promising way of interpreting these philosophical solutions.
Yeah. So, to do at one level, if I were to go back to the now, the being in now, the being of now, or the being in now, if I were to somehow apply some sort of measurement of time, and I were to come up with some sort of instrument to measure time, my watch, or when my watch is already predicated on some other measurement of the movement of time, and I were to dissect that time and call it now. If I were to identify some sort of material thing in the now, I can do that. But is there something about that measurement itself, even, that is missing the more fundamental issue, or or it's missing the profundity of what it is that is being described?
Well, I would say so. Yeah, I'd say that you could do everything that you've just said, and that sort of thing, does go on. But all that happens within the timeless now, or the eternal now, or the unchanging now. Things come and go within the now, including measurements of time, including intervals of time. I think Einstein is a Leibnizian about time, because Einstein and Leibniz think that time is the totality of temporal relations between events, or perhaps between objects. So once you've specified this is simultaneous with that, this is after this is after that, and so on, the totality of those relations is time. But I think this Leibniz time, or this Leibniz Newton, this Leibniz Einstein time, exists within the timeless now. It exists within the timeless now, or it's the coming and going of events. It's the set of temporal relations between events that come and go within the timeless now. Yeah, the timeless now is still here now while we're having this conversation. It hasn't moved on at all. It hasn't changed in any way whatsoever. You've changed a bit, I've changed a bit, but the timeless now hasn't changed in any way whatsoever. And it's so unfathomably immense. The timeless now is without any boundaries. It's not physical. It's not mental. It's necessary for everything that happens. I tend to think of creation as coming out of the now, rather than coming from the road behind me and heading down the road in front of me. I tend to think of creation as coming out of the now. In other words, everything is emanating from the presence of God. This is what's happening all the while. Nothing else ever happens. Nobody's ever come across anything else except everything that emanates from the presence of God. Creation is in the now. In the now. I'm not saying it didn't begin. I'm not saying it didn't begin. It might have had a beginning, as described in Genesis. But the eternal now is there, irrespective of creation.
Yes. I want to come back to that. Yeah. So there's this new, it seems like there's a lot going on that overlaps with the philosophy of mind, what it is that, in other words, the discipline that what it is that we take to be the mind in relation to the body, what it is that we take to be the nature of consciousness itself. At the intersection of neuroscience today, there's been some recent trends in the philosophy of mind that have actually made their way into neuroscientific studies, as well as into even at one level popular sort of or more mainstream in over here evangelical circles. There's a draw toward panpsychism in neuroscience. In the evangelical world, because of the embeddedness in the body, there's been a draw toward versions of hylomorphism. Certainly this has been sort of a trend to see persons as the self, the consciousness itself is somehow at one level identical to matter, but not just matter in a reductive sense, of course, but matter in some sort of more profound sense. So these have taken shape. These certainly have taken up a lot more of the kind of maybe the social conditioning of our time and space now. These are some of the trends that are really occupying some of the literature and the neuroscientific literature that also crosses over into the academic or evangelical literature that is here. What do you think about these trends of hylomorphism and panpsychism?
Well, panpsychism, depending on how you understand it, might be right or wrong. I mean, I think it's right that the consciousness presupposed by quantum physics is everywhere. And if that consciousness is God, because otherwise, what could it be? It has to be something of sufficient strength to sustain the whole universe. Then that gives you a kind of pantheism. I don't know whether it gives you panpsychism. If I mean, the etymology of panpsychism suggests mind everywhere. Well, I suppose if it's the mind of God, I agree with it. But you have to be careful. I mean, that's to collapse this kind of panpsychism into pantheism. But then you have to draw a distinction between two kinds of pantheism. You could have pantheism as the view that God is everything, and you could have pantheism as the view that God is everywhere. Now, I think the first of these views is false. It's not right that God is everything, because there's a very sharp distinction between God and creation. The reason why there's a very sharp distinction between God and creation is that there's a very sharp distinction between being and beings, and beings. Being does being, right? God creates, being beings. And there's a very sharp distinction between presence and present things. Or there's a very sharp distinction between pure presence, the unchanging now, and present events, things that come and go in the present. Now, those are reasons for rejecting pantheism in the sense of God being everything. It's not right that God is everything. God is necessary for everything, and God creates. But it's a mistake to think that God is everything. But God is everywhere. That sounds fine to me, because it's at least consistent with, and maybe logically implied by, my view that quantum reality presupposes consciousness. And if it presupposes consciousness, it presupposes consciousness everywhere, not just in the laboratory or where the scientists are observing episodes in the subatomic chambers and things like that. Right, there has to be consciousness everywhere. How that works out, that kind of all-pervading nature of consciousness, is not clear to me. I mean, it doesn't necessarily follow from it that, I don't know, that stones have their own awareness or something, or something like that. Right. So I don't see it that a kind of animism follows from it. It just means that God's consciousness is necessary for the psychophysical world, something like that. I mean, with regard to the body, you're talking about people talking about the body. I'm not so familiar with this modern literature about the body, but it seems to me a mistake to say that you're very closely tied to your body, not just your body, but this entire human being could have existed without you existing. Somebody else might have had to pervade it or operate it, but you're not logically or ontologically very closely tied to this human being. You can talk about being a human being, but that seems to me it would have to be a contingent identity. You'd have to allow logical room for contingent identities, or there would have to be such a thing as a being something for a while. So you might be this human being for a while, which means you're centered on it, you pervade it, you view the world from it. You seem to go where it goes, or if it moves, then you change your perspective. But it would be a contingent fact about this human being that you are it. It's a bit like you are the head of department or something like that.
Right. It's still a contingent fact.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
No,
yes.
I mean,
so
I wrote. I mean, years ago, I wrote a book about Maurice Merleau-Ponty. You mentioned it in your introduction, and Merleau-Ponty, to my mind, had the best shot at arguing that he is this body. He says, "Je suis mon corps. I am my body. Je suis mon corps. I am my body," and he has a pretty good shot at trying to describe what it would be like to be the body if he is this body. But it doesn't work because he's got no explanation of the relationship between consciousness and the body, or consciousness and the brain. The mind-body problem, it's very, very, very difficult to make it go away. It's not clear what the relationship is between consciousness and atoms. In fact, the best and clearest cases of the psychophysical relationship are perhaps in perception, where when you're perceiving objects and you're presented with the physical world. We tend to try and imagine some kind of interface between consciousness and the brain, and that's not a very useful habit of thought for trying to solve the mind-body problem. I think maybe we should talk less about consciousness and more about presence. You are a presence. There's the presence of God, but you are a presence as well, and your presence is in the presence of God, in different senses of in or within the presence of God.
Yeah. Wow. So going Kant, you were saying that Kant extended, to some extent, at least the way he's been taken in today's sort of academic analytic philosophy, he's extended the kind of the distraction that we see in Descartes' kind of, or at least the appropriation of Descartes. Did he extend that in some ways that has contributed to kind of the distraction of the day?
Oh, I think so. If you think so, if you look at the paralogisms, so-called paralogisms chapter of the Critique of Pure Reason, it contains essentially an attack on the philosophy of Descartes, an attack on the idea that that which has your experiences, the real you, is an immaterial substance. And Kant argues there that to take that view is to misuse one of his 12 categories, to misuse the category of substance, and possibly to misuse the category of causation as well. So in a very clear sense, in being anti-metaphysical, Kant is an anti-Cartesian thinker, even though his epistemological starting point in the Critique of Pure Reason is rather Cartesian. It's me here now, visually presented with some physical objects. It's a rather first-person singular approach to epistemology. But I think the Critique of Pure Reason is designed as an epistemology book, rather like the Meditations, but ends up being having ontological commitments. I mean, I think in the moral philosophy, Kant says that there are three postulates of pure practical reason. And these are the the existence of God, the immortality of the soul, and the freedom of the will. And in the Critique of Pure Reason, he says we really do have the freedom of the will. We're determined on one level as well as physical beings or as phenomenal beings, but we do really have free will. But Kant says the other two postulates have to remain postulates of pure practical reason, the existence of God and the immortality of the soul. Well, there are two ways of reading what Kant means by a postulate. I mean, a more constructive or religious way of understanding Kant would be to say, well, I can't have criticized the powers of reason, the powers of logical thinking, and they're not up to showing that God and the soul exist. But of course, there could well be, or there are, God and the soul, and human beings need these postulates to live by. And for all we know, God and the soul exist. But a more destructive way of reading Kant comes out as more like Nietzsche on this second, more destructive way. I can't have criticized the powers of reason so thoroughly in the Critique of Pure Reason that it's incoherent to suppose that there could be a soul or that God could exist. This is to misuse the categories of substance, the category of unity, the category of plurality, category of causation, and so on. And so God and the soul are only postulates, they're fictions that human beings subscribe to, because life would be more or less unbearable if we didn't believe in God and the soul. But they're not coherent postulates, right? They're incoherent because of the way the Critique of Pure Reason has panned out. Now, I suspect that really, by and large, modernity has consciously or unconsciously absorbed this proto-Nietzschean destructive Kant, rather than Kant, a bit like St. Thomas Aquinas, criticizing reason in order to make room for faith, right? On the more constructive view, he's a kind of very late Thomist. On the destructive view, he's a proto-Nietzschean.
That's interesting.
So you can read him either way, I think. I read the Critique of Pure Reason more than once, and it's not really disambiguated by rereading, or not so far anyway.
Yes.
He writes on the cusp of construction and destruction. Derrida should have been more interested in him than he was, I think.
Yes.
Derrida writes about the metaphysics of presence. Derrida thinks that there's a hidden metaphysics of presence, which is characteristic of Western thought. And I think the way it's normally taken, this is thought to be a bad thing, because Kant and Husserl have shown that things are conceptually constituted and, meanings are not transparent and so on. But I wonder if one could reread Derrida without deriding it and uncover a real metaphysics of presence, which would be the presence of God. And Western thought would be tacitly presupposing it, but rightly so, because any thought should presuppose the presence of God, or the unchanging or eternal nowness of God.
Yeah.
We'd have to reread or rewrite Derrida to do that.
Yeah.
He wrote a book,
Right.
La Voix et le Phénomène, Voice and Phenomena.
Interesting. Yeah, that is we could spend more time on that, for sure. I know I don't want to take up too much of your time. I want to ask, hopefully, if it's all right with you, a couple more questions, and then I'll bring it around to a close. Okay. This has been fascinating. It's raised a lot of questions, and I think these are important questions that impinge upon the bigger question about the importance of theology today in the academy, in the church, in the world, and society in general. It has an impact. It impinges on those sorts of broader sociological questions. I mean, I think a lot of what you said has real import to, I was reading not a philosopher, but a sociologist who's impacted my thinking, Neil Postman, in his in his book Technopoly. And he's talking about a lot of the things that we're talking about in the nature in terms of the history of philosophy and how it's shaped culture, how it's reshaped culture, how it's been appropriated and conditioned in these contingent circumstances, different ideas and patterns of thought or habits, as you've called them, that have shaped our society and have, for good or worse, for bad or good. He talks about everything that has been amplified or exacerbated by technology, certainly by the internet, and even more so now than when he wrote the book. Artificial intelligence has amplified this more fundamental problem that you've been picking up on sociologically in terms of everything has become a technical problem that can be solved.
Well, it's not right. It's not correct, is it? I mean, the problems that we've been talking about are very, very removed from technical problems.
That's right.
So it's just, yet another very regrettable fact about modernity, I think.
Yes, that's helpful. Yeah, that's really important.
I think in this world of that we're stepping into now of AI and robotics and so on, it would be extremely beneficial if people read theology, if people prayed, if people looked into traditions of contemplation in Christianity, if people tried to discern, insofar as we finite beings can, try to discern the permanent within the transient, or see the transient, see through the transient to the permanent, if you possibly can. Otherwise, I think we're going to be even more lost than we are already. That's my intuition about it. I mean, I don't know how the discussion is going in the US, but in the UK, people are more or less saying that once AI and the robotics kick in, there won't be jobs anymore. It won't be the role of human beings to have jobs. So then the question is, well, what are we going to do now? What are we going to do now? Right? What are human beings for? And I think, I don't know, we could grow vegetables that are better for us than supermarket vegetables or something. But I would hope that one thing that might happen is that we are brought up sharp with the question of our own existence. Who am I? Where am I? What am I for? What am I doing? So I'm hoping that the advent of AI and robotics will bring us up sharp with existentialist questions. I mean, you're asking about my biography. I was interested in French literature, humanistic and atheistic French writers like Sartre, Malraux, Saint-Exupéry, Albert Camus. These people, they were some of the people who got me into philosophy. Right before I ever studied philosophy, people said, "Oh, you're interested in that? You should study philosophy." Turned out not to be very true. Actually, there was probably more philosophy in those guys than there was in the philosophy that I was studying. At least in the beginning, it takes a while to get the profundity of the philosophical questions out and discussed. I feel.
Yes. Yeah. Just you raised the question of kind of what philosophers talk about as the kind of the distinction problem, and related to that, I think you've talked about the nature of philosophy in relation to theology, having theological answers, in terms of some kind of synthesis. You're interested in not just in analysis and analytics, but you see the synthesis of the world in terms of theological answers. So you've come back at this a few different times in different ways in terms of the Trinity. I guess the question is, how do we arrive at theological truth in when it comes to God Himself, the kind of God there is.
Yeah.
And because that really matters about the question of truth. It matters. It impinges on that. And some would arrive at it maybe in a different way. They wouldn't arrive at it via the Trinity.
I think that's absolutely fine. I mean, I think my route to Christianity is a peculiar route, really, through secular academic philosophy and the failure of secular solutions or putative solutions to these problems. So it's quite an unusual route. And it only, I mean, the kind of theology or the kind of Christianity that I'm talking about or endorsing is in a way only as much as you need to answer these philosophical questions that I'm talking about. I mean, you might need much more Christianity or different understandings of Christianity in order to, I don't know, come to terms with the death of a loved one, or to learn how to live, or to seek moral guidance in how to resolve moral dilemmas, or something like that. Right? I'm talking about the Trinity insofar as it can be deployed or understood in terms of being, presence, and consciousness. The I am of Exodus, the interestingly, being for itself in existentialist terms would have to turn out to be primordial or fundamental because of the I am in Exodus.
Right. Yeah.
In other words, the being that underlines the being that is presupposed by everything is somebody. But that's all right. That fits with what I've been claiming about consciousness being presupposed by quantum physics. Because if being now and consciousness are mutually implying, if consciousness is the presence of being, and being is the presence of consciousness, and the now is the presence of being, and so on. If they're all mutually implying in these different ways, then being is someone. I mean, I don't make any sense of there existing consciousness that is not personal, that is not a person, or is not somebody. Really. I mean,
yes.
Otherwise, I mean, I can come at the Holy Trinity in another way. I think the Holy Trinity is a grammatical distinction, and this has been largely missed in the last 2,000 years of theology. But the Father is the first person singular. The three persons are grammatical persons, and this does not give us three gods. I mean, my colleague Richard Swinburne thinks that we can only make sense of the Trinity if the Trinity is three gods with a little g. Well, Richard hasn't seen that actually the Trinity is a grammatical distinction. So the first person of the Trinity is the Father. Again, the I am. The I am of Exodus. The second person of the Trinity is the you, who is Christ, because Christ is God's presence to the world. Right? Well, we can understand Christ on many different levels, but two relevant levels is Christ, qua human being, is obviously present to the world, and the world is present to Christ. But Christ, who has existed from all eternity, is the second person of the Trinity, and that still counts as the you, because if there is, if God creates, then it's in the presence of Christ, or in the eternal presence of Christ, right? So Christ is the second person of the Trinity. Again, grammatical persons, and the Holy Spirit is the he, she, it. It's described in different ways, different languages. But it's the Holy Spirit or the Holy Ghost is the third person of the Trinity, grammatical person. Now, this doesn't commit us to three gods any more than if I say I am Steve Priest, Joshua Farris addresses me as you, and Carrie, my wife, says he's still doing videos for America or something, right?
Right.
It doesn't give you
Yes.
three people. So I like my interpretation of the Trinity as grammatical persons. And if you think it through, it actually gives you being, presence, and consciousness. Being,
Yes.
being, presence, and consciousness are three, so to speak, ecstasies or dimensions of fundamental reality.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. So, the Trinity. Yeah. Yes. So it's kind of very sympathetic to maybe Augustine's psychological analogy as being a way of arriving at the Trinity.
Yeah. Oh, I think so. Yeah, I think so.
I'm very sympathetic to that. Yes. Well, okay. So this has been really fascinating. I really appreciate your time. Coming back around, if you just had a brief thought on this, and we'll bring it to a close here, is I think what do we? I'm reminded of. I think Roger Scruton said something like this. I'm probably butchering it, but I remember something about him commenting on the problem of forgetting philosophy. Is kind of or leaving philosophy out of the discussion is kind of forgetting the questions that gave rise to the answers in the first place, something to that effect. If what are we to do to go forward? What should we do as a society, as academic institutions, to keep our thought life, our life in general alive, to keep life in the university?
I think we have to ask profound questions. And one of the difficulties in doing philosophy is understanding the questions. You see, one of the difficulties there is that we think we understand the questions already when we do not. So if you ask, why is anything you? What does it mean to exist? What is the present, and what is consciousness, and so on? We think we've got a good grip on what those questions are, but the questions have a profundity that mainly escapes us. So I think the way forward is to appreciate the profundity of the questions and how actually they can't be understood scientifically or through scientific thought. Scientific thought is third-person thought, and these realities are essentially first-person singular. And scientific thought is means to end thinking. And here we're trying to think or even experience the intrinsic, the nature of being, or the nature of reality, the fundamental nature of being, fundamental nature of reality. Now, I don't know what it would take, you see, for people to contemplate these questions in their profundity. I don't know what would cause them to do that, really. We're all so busy. But I hope that we can be less pessimistic about the AI and the robotics. And instead of sitting around doing nothing, we can maybe be brought up with existentialist sharpness to contemplate these questions. Once our jobs are being done for us, hopefully all our thinking will not be done for us.
Yeah, no, that's very good. Well, in this episode, we've been talking about philosophical questions that need theological answers. And Stephen Priest has been with me on the show and helping us understand what that means, what it means to do philosophy, and then what it means in terms of the theological answers that seem to follow from those philosophical questions. And so thanks again, Stephen, for being with me. I really appreciate it. I thought this was a really fascinating and profound discussion, and I hope it will stir up a lot more discussions that will follow in the future. Thanks again for your time.
No, well, thanks for inviting me, Joshua. It's been my pleasure. It's been great.
Thank you. Thank you.